The words still burn in my ears, sharp as the day they were hurled at me. My father's voice, thick with venom, echoed through the old house, its walls trembling as if they too felt the weight of his rejection. I was 25, standing in the doorway of the living room, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, ready to leave for good. But his words stopped me cold. "You're not my son. Get out." He'd screamed, his face red, veins bulging at his temples. I'd always known he was a hard man, Richard Callahan, the patriarch who ruled our family like a king, but this was different. This was a blade, cutting through years of unspoken resentment, slicing away any illusion of love. I stood there, staring into his gray eyes, searching for something regret, maybe, or doubt. There was none. Only rage. My mother, standing behind him, clutched her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. But she didn't speak. She never did when he was like this. My younger sister, Ellie, was upstairs, probably curled up in her room, pretending she couldn't hear. I wanted to scream back, to tell him he was wrong, that I was his blood, his firstborn, the son who'd spent years trying to earn his approval. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind me, the sound final, like a coffin lid. That was 3 years ago. I swore I'd never come back. I built a life in the city, a small one, but mine, working as a mechanic, living in a cramped apartment, keeping my distance from the past. I thought I'd buried it. Until the phone call came. It was Ellie, her voice trembling through the static. "Dad's sick, Tom. Really sick. He's asking for you." I laughed, bitter and hollow. Asking for me. The man who'd disowned me. I wanted to hang up, to tell her she was mistaken, that Richard Callahan didn't ask for anyone, least of all me. But then she said it. He collapsed. "The doctors don't know if he'll make it." My chest tightened. I saw him in my mind, that towering figure, now frail, broken. I hated him. I hated him for the years of cold silences, for the way he'd favored Ellie, for the way he'd made me feel like I was never enough. But something else stirred in me, something I couldn't name. Duty, maybe. Or something dark. Era need to face him one last time, to prove I wasn't the failure he'd branded me. I packed a bag and drove the 4 hours back to Willow Creek, the town I'd sworn to forget. The house looked the same, peeling paint, sagging porch, the oak tree in the yard still leaning like it might fall any day. Ellie met me at the door, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She hugged me, and for a moment, I was her big brother again, the one who'd protected her from Dad's temper, from the world. "He's upstairs," she whispered. "He's been asking for you every day." I didn't want to believe her. I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something sour, like decay. My father lay in his bed, a shadow of the man I remembered. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow, a tangle of tubes snaking from his arms to machines that beeped softly. He opened his eyes when I entered, and for a moment, I thought I saw relief. Then his lips curled into that familiar sneer. "Took you long enough," he rasped. I clenched my fists. my anger flaring. Even now, on what might be his deathbed, he couldn't help himself. I wanted to turn and leave, to let him die alone with his bitterness. But I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because Ellie was watching, her eyes pleading. Maybe because, deep down, I wanted answers. Why had he hated me? What had I done to make him cast me out? The next few days were a blur. I stayed in my old room, the one with the faded baseball posters and the creaky floorboard. Ellie filled me in on what I'd missed. Dad's heart had been failing for years, but he'd refused treatment, stubborn as ever. The collapse came after a fight with Mom, though Ellie didn't know what about. Mom was different now, quieter, her faith replaced by a weary resignation. She barely looked at me, as if my presence reminded her of something she wanted to forget. I helped where I could, fetching groceries, fixing the leaky sink, sitting by Dad's bed when Ellie needed a break. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was sharp, cutting. "You think you're some hero, coming back here," he said one night, his voice weak but laced with venom. "You're still nothing." I didn't respond. Couldn't. But his words fed something inside me, a dark seed that had been planted years ago. Revenge. I didn't know what it looked like yet, but I felt it growing. A quiet promise that I'd make him see me, really see me, before this was over. I started noticing things. The way Mom flinched when Dad spoke. The way Ellie avoided certain topics, like she was hiding something. The way the neighbors whispered when I passed by. There was a secret here, one they were all keeping, and it was tied to why Dad had thrown me out. I started digging. Old letters in the attic, bank statements tucked away in drawers, a locked box under Dad's bed that Ellie pretended not to see when I asked about it. Each clue pulled me deeper into a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to face. One night, I found a photograph, tucked inside a book Mom used to read to us. It was me, maybe 5 years old, sitting on a man's lap, a man who wasn't Dad. His face was kind, his eyes warm, nothing like the cold steel of Richard Callahan's. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, was a name, Daniel. My heart stopped. Was this why Dad hated me? Was I not his son? The thought hit me like a freight train, and with it came a rush of rage, of betrayal. If it was true, then every insult, every rejection made sense. But it also meant my whole life was a lie. I confronted Ellie the next morning, holding the photo like a weapon. She went pale, her hands shaking. "Tom, please," she whispered. "Don't do this." But I had to know. I had to know why my father, Richard, or whoever he was, had spent my life punishing me for something I didn't understand. I waited until Dad was asleep, then slipped into his room and took the key to the locked box from his nightstand. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, yellowed with H, addressed to Mom. The words blurred as I read them, but one line stood out. "He's not mine, but I'll raise him as my own." My vision darkened. I wanted to scream, to tear the house apart, to demand answers. But then I heard Ida gasp, weak and desperate, from the bed. Dad's eyes were open, wide with fear, his hand clutching his chest. He was collapsing again, and I was the only one there. The room spun as I stood frozen. The letter still clutched in my hand. His words searing into my mind. My father, not my father. If the letter was truly gasping. His face contorted in pain. His hand clawing at the air. I should have moved faster. Should have called for help. But for a moment, all I could feel was the weight of that letter. The weight of a lifetime of lies. His eyes locked onto mine. Pleading. And something snapped me out of it. I dropped the letter and grabbed the phone. Dialing 911 with shaking fingers. My voice was steady as I gave the address. But inside, I was a storm rage. Fear. And something else. Something like pity. All colliding. The paramedics arrived in minutes. Their boots thumping through the house. Their voices calm but urgent. I stepped back, watching as they worked on him. Attaching monitors. Shouting terms I didn't understand. Ellie burst in. Her face pale. Her hands covering her mouth. Mom followed. Her eyes distant. Like she was watching a play she'd seen too many times. They took him away on a stretcher. The siren fading into the night. Leaving the house eerily silent. Ellie turned to me. Her eyes searching. What happened, Tom? She asked. Her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. Couldn't. The letter was still on the floor. Its edges curling like it was alive. Mocking me. I picked it up. Stuffed it into my pocket. And told her I'd follow the ambulance. At the hospital. The waiting room was cold. The fluorescent lights buzzing like flies. Ellie sat beside me, twisting her hands. Her eyes red but dry. Mom was in the chapel. Praying. Or maybe just hiding. I wanted to ask Ellie about the letter. About the man in the photo. About everything. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I sat there, replaying Dadus Richard swords from 3 years ago. You're not my son. Was it true? Had he known all along? The doctor came out after what felt like hours. His face unreadable. He's stable, he said. Heart attack. But he's responding to treatment. You can see him soon. Ellie sagged with relief. But I felt nothing. Stable. Alive. The man who'd raised me, who'd hated me, who'd lied to me, was still here. And I didn't know if I was glad or furious. When they let us in, he was propped up in bed. Wires and tubes everywhere. His face pale but his eyes sharp. He looked at me. And for the first time, I saw something new. Fear. Maybe. Or shame. Tom. He croaked. His voice weak. I didn't move closer. I didn't trust myself. Why? I asked. The word slipping out before I could stop it. He knew what I meant. His eyes flicked to the pocket where I'd stuffed the letter. And his jaw tightened. Not now, he said, glancing at Ellie, who was hovering by the door. Not here. I wanted to press him, to demand the truth. But Ellie's hand on my arm stopped me. Let him rest, she whispered. I nodded, but my mind was racing. Back at the house. Couldn't sleep. The letter burned in my pocket. And the photo of the man Daniel was on my nightstand. His kind eyes haunting me. I started digging again. Rifling through old boxes. Searching for anything that could explain it. I found more letters. Tucked in a shoebox under Mom's bed. They were from Daniel. Written years ago. Before I was born. They were love letters, full of promises, dreams of a life together. My mother's name, Margaret, was scrawled in his messy handwriting, each word dripping with devotion. But one letter was different. It was dated a month before my birth, and it was angry, desperate. You can't marry him, Margaret. He's not what you think. He'll destroy you. My stomach churned. I didn't know who Daniel was talking about, Richard. Presumably, but the words felt like a warning. One my mother had ignored. I kept reading, piecing together a story I wasn't ready for. Daniel had been my mother's first love, a man she'd met in college. They'd planned to marry, but something Simeon had come between them. Richard, my father, or the man I'd thought was my father. The letters stopped abruptly, the last one unfinished, as if Daniel had given up. I sat there, surrounded by papers, my head pounding. If Daniel was my real father, then Richard had known I wasn't his son. Had he married Mom knowing she was pregnant with another man's child? Had he raised me out of duty, only to resent me for it? The thought made me sick. I wanted to confront Mom, to shake her until she told me everything. But she was still at the hospital, and Ellie was asleep. I was alone with my questions, my anger growing, sharpening into something dangerous. I started to imagine its revenge. Not violence, not yet, but something colder, more deliberate. I'd make Richard admit it, make him face the truth, make him beg for my forgiveness. I'd show him I was better than he ever gave me credit for. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. Richard was awake, stronger than the night before, but still frail. He looked at me like he knew what was coming. "You found it, didn't you?" he said, his voice low. I nodded, pulling the letter from my pocket. "Is it true?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, and for a moment, I thought he might deny it. Then he sighed, a sound heavy with years of secrets. "Your mother made her choice," he said, "and I made mine. It wasn't enough." I leaned closer, my voice steady but cold. "Tell me everything, or I walk away and let you die alone." His eyes widened, and I saw it again, fear. But this time, it wasn't just about his heart. It was about me. For the first time, I had power over him, and it felt good. Too good. I spent the next few days splitting my time between the hospital and the house, helping Ellie, watching Mom, and digging deeper. I found a newspaper clipping in the attic, yellowed and brittle, about a car accident 25 years ago. Daniel's name was in it. He died the night I was born. My mother had never told me. Neither had Richard. The pieces were coming together, but they didn't fit neatly. Richard had married Mom knowing she was pregnant with Daniel's child. He'd raised me, but not out of love, out of obligation, or control, or something worse. I started to notice how he spoke to Mom. Even now, weak as he was, sharp, cutting, like she was his servant, not his wife. I saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear I'd seen in Ellie's. He wasn't just a hard man. He was cruel. And I was starting to understand why Daniel had warned her. I began to plan, not just to confront him, but to unravel him, to make him face every lie, every hurt he'd inflicted. I'd stay. I'd help. I'd be the son he never wanted until he had no choice but to see me. And then I'd make him pay. But something else was happening, too. Every time I looked at Ellie, at her tired eyes, her quiet strength, I felt a pull, a reminder of who I'd been before the anger took over. She needed me. Mom needed me. And, whether I wanted to admit it or not, Richard needed me. I was his only hope, the only one here, the only one who could decide whether he lived or died. And that power was starting to scare me. The hospital became my second home. Its sterile halls and beeping machines a constant reminder of the fragility of the man I'd once feared. Richard was stable, but weak. His recovery slow. His temper sharper than ever. He'd snap at the nurses. At Mom. Even at Ellie. But with me, he was different, wary. Almost cautious. Like he knew I held something over him. That letter. Those words. He's not mine, but I'll raise him as my own. Were my weapon. And he sensed it. I carried it everywhere. Folded in my pocket. A talisman of truth I wasn't ready to fully wield. I wanted him to squirm. To feel the weight of his secrets. Just as I had for years. But every time I looked at him, frail and tethered to machines, I felt a tug of something else, guilt. Maybe. Or pity. It infuriated me. He didn't deserve my pity. He'd made my life hell. Cast me out. Lied to me about who I was. Yet here I was. Sitting by his bed. Bringing him water. Adjusting his pillows. Playing the dutiful son. Ellie noticed it, too. You don't have to do this, Tom. She said one evening as we sat in the hospital cafeteria, sipping bitter coffee. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were searching, like she was trying to find the brother she'd lost 3 years ago. You don't owe him anything. I wanted to agree. To tell her I was only here to get answers. To make him pay. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I shrugged, staring into my cup, the black liquid reflecting my distorted face. You're here for me, she said, her voice breaking. Aren't you? I looked at her then. Really looked at her. She was 22 now. But she seemed younger. Fragile. Like the girl I'd comforted after Dad's rages. I nodded. And she reached for my hand. Her grip tight. I missed you, she whispered. I felt a lump in my throat. But I didn't pull away. Ellie was the one good thing in this mess. The one person who'd never betrayed me. I couldn't let her down. Not again. Back at the house, I kept digging. The newspaper clipping about Daniel's accident gnawed at me. It said he died in a single-car crash. Late at night. On a rural road outside Willow Creek. No witnesses. No skid marks. Just a mangled wreck and a body. The article called it a tragedy. But something about it felt wrong. Too clean. Like a story someone wanted to wrap up neatly. I started asking questions quietly. Carefully. I visited the library. Pulling old records. Talking to the librarian. Mrs. Hargrove. Who'd lived in Willow Creek forever. She remembered Daniel. Called him a sweet boy. Said he'd been heartbroken when Mom married Richard. Your mother was different back then, she said. Her eyes distant. Full of light. until she wasn't. I pressed her for more, but she clammed up, like she'd said too much. I didn't stop. I found an old friend of Daniel's, a guy named Pete who ran the hardware store. He was reluctant, but a few beers at the local bar loosened his tongue. Daniel was crazy about your mom, he said, staring into his glass. But Richard, he was trouble. Always had a temper. Even back then. Daniel said he didn't trust him. Said he'd do anything to get what he wanted. Pete's voice dropped. Then Daniel died. And your mom married Richard a month later. Never sat right with me. My blood ran cold. Was it possible? Had Richard done something to Daniel? The thought was insane. But it took root, feeding the anger I'd been nursing. I went back to the house, my mind racing. I found Mom in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a mechanical precision, her eyes avoiding mine. Who was Daniel? I asked, my voice low but firm. She froze, the knife slipping from her hand, clattering onto the counter. Don't, Tom, she said, her voice barely audible. Please. But I couldn't stop. I pulled out the photo, the one of me on Daniel's lap, and held it up. Was he my father? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she'd break. But then she straightened, her eyes hard. You don't understand, she said. You don't know what it was like. She walked away, leaving me with the photo and 1,000 questions. That night, I sat by Richard's bed, watching him sleep. His breathing was uneven, his face lined with pain even in rest. I thought about confronting him, about demanding the truth about Daniel, about Mom, about me. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted him stronger. Wanted him to look me in the eye when I tore his world apart. The days blurred together. I helped Ellie with the house. Ran errands. Sat through tense silences with Mom. I kept digging, piecing together fragments of the past. I found a journal in the attic. Mom's. From before I was born. The entries were short, cryptic. But one stood out. Richard knows. He says he'll forgive me. But I see it in his eyes. He'll never let it go. My heart pounded. Richard knew about Daniel. Knew I wasn't his. Had he married Mom to punish her? To control her? The thought made me sick. But it also fueled me. I started to see him differently, not just as the man who'd raised me, but as a predator. Someone who'd taken everything from my mother. From me. I began to plan. Not just for answers, but for justice. I'd make him confess. Not just to me, but to everyone. I'd expose him. Strip away his pride. His control. I'd make him feel what I'd felt: small, powerless, unwanted. But Ellie complicated things. She was loyal to him, despite everything. And I saw it in the way she cared for him, the way she defended him when I pushed too hard. He's our father, Tom, she said one day, her voice sharp. He's not perfect, but he's all we have. I wanted to tell her the truth, to show her the letter, the photo, the journal, but I couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready, and I wasn't sure I was either. At the hospital, Richard started to improve. He was sitting up, talking more, his old arrogance creeping back. One evening, he looked at me, his eyes narrow. "You're still here," he said, like it was an accusation. "Why?" I leaned closer, my voice low. "Because I want the truth. And you're going to give it to me." His face paled, but he didn't look away. For the first time, I saw something like respect in his eyes, mixed with fear. It was intoxicating. I was starting to unravel him, and it felt good. Too good. But then I'd see Ellie, her tired smile, her quiet strength, and I'd falter. She didn't deserve this. Neither did Mom. Not really. They were trapped. Just like I'd been. Caught in Richard's web. I started to wonder if revenge was enough. If exposing him would free us or destroy us. The line between justice and vengeance was blurring. And I wasn't sure which side I was on anymore. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to the truth. I went back to the house. Found Mom's journal again. And read it cover to cover. The last entry was dated the day of Daniel's accident. "I'm scared," she wrote. "Richard knows everything. He says it's my fault. I don't know what he'll do." My hands shook as I closed the book. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But I knew one thing. Richard Callahan had a lot to answer for. And I was going to make sure he did. The truth was a splinter under my skin. Sharp and persistent. Impossible to ignore. Every day, it dug deeper. Fueled by the fragments I'd uncovered Mom's journal. The letters. The photo of Daniel holding me. The newspaper clipping about his death. I was starting to see Richard not just as the man who'd raised me, but as someone capable of something darker. Something sinister. The idea that he might have had a hand in Daniel's death wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a fire in my chest. Burning away doubt. Leaving only a need for answers. But I had to be careful. Ellie was watching me. Her worry growing. And Mom was a ghost. Drifting through the house. Avoiding my questions. I couldn't push too hard. Not yet. Not until I had proof. I spent my days at the hospital. Playing the part of the dutiful son. But my nights were for digging. I went through every corner of the house. Every drawer. Every closet. Looking for anything that could tie Richard to Daniel's death. I found nothing concrete. Just more hints bills for car repairs dated around the time of the accident. A receipt for a tow truck. A scribbled note in Richard's handwriting that said, "Fix it before anyone asks." It wasn't enough. But it was enough to keep me going. I started talking to people in town. Casually. Like I was just catching up. Old neighbors. Shopkeepers. Anyone who might remember that night. Most didn't want to talk about it. Their eyes darting away. Their voices tight. But one man, a retired mechanic named Joe, gave me something. He'd worked on Richard's car years ago. Said it had come in with front-end damage. The kind you get from a collision. He told me it was a deer. Joe said, scratching his beard. But I don't know. Looked like something else. I pressed him. But he shrugged. Said it was a long time ago. My mind raced. A collision. No skid marks in Daniel's crash. Was it possible? I needed more. I went back to the library, pulling every record I could find. The police report was brief. Clinical single vehicle accident. Driver deceased. No foul play suspected. But there was a detail I hadn't noticed before. The car had been towed to a lot owned by Richard's cousin. A man who'd died years ago. Convenient. Too convenient. I felt the pieces coming together. But they were still incomplete. Like a puzzle missing its edges. At the hospital, Richard was getting stronger. His voice louder. His temper back in full force. He'd bark orders at the nurses. Complain about the food. Snap at Mom when she fussed over him. But with me, he was quieter. His eyes following me like he was waiting for something. I started testing him. Dropping hints about Daniel. Watching his face. I found Mom's old journal. I said one day. Casual. Like it was nothing. His hand tightened on the bedrail. But he didn't respond. She wrote about someone named Daniel. I pressed. My voice steady. Said you knew him. His eyes flicked to mine. Sharp and cold. But he only grunted. Old history. He said. Leave it alone. I didn't. Couldn't. That night, I broke into the locked box again. The one under his bed. I'd only glanced at it before. Too shaken by the letter to look deeper. This time, I emptied it. There were more letters. Some from Mom to Daniel. Others from Daniel to her. All written before I was born. But at the bottom was something else, a police badge. Old and tarnished. With a name engraved, Daniel Harper. My breath caught. Was Daniel a cop? The thought hit me hard. Reshaping everything. If he was a cop, his death might not have been an accident. If Richard had something to hide. Something Daniel knew about. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my old room. The badge in my hand. Turning it over and over. I thought about confronting Richard. About holding the badge in front of him and watching him crack. But I needed more. I needed proof that would hold up. Something undeniable. I started following the money. Richard had always been secretive about his finances. But I found bank statements in his study. Hidden in a locked drawer I pried open. There were transfers. Large ones. To an account I didn't recognize. Dated around the time of Daniel's death. I didn't know what they meant. But they felt wrong. Like payments for silence. I called Pete, Daniel's old friend, and asked if he knew anything about Daniel being a cop. He went quiet, then said, yeah. He was undercover. Working on something big. Never told me what. Then he died. And it all went away. My heart pounded. Undercover. Something big. Richard. It was a leap. But it fit. Richard had always been a man who got what he wanted. No matter the cost. Had he wanted Mom so badly he'd killed to have her. I went back to the hospital. My anger barely contained. Richard was sitting up. Arguing with a nurse about his medication. When he saw me, he stopped. His eyes narrowing. You look like you've got something to say, he said. His voice low. I leaned in. Close enough to smell the antiseptic on his skin. I know about Daniel, I said. I know he was a cop. And I know you had something to do with his death. His face didn't change. But his hands shook. Just for a second. You don't know anything, he said. But his voice was weaker than before. I smiled. Cold and sharp. I will. I left him there, his eyes burning into my back. I was close, so close, but I was also slipping. The anger was consuming me, turning me into someone I didn't recognize. Ellie saw it. She cornered me at the house, her voice sharp. "What are you doing, Tom? You're scaring me." I wanted to tell her, to show her everything, but I couldn't. Not yet. She'd hate me for it, for tearing apart what little family we had left. Mom was no help either. She was shutting down, retreating into herself, her silence louder than any confession. I kept digging, but the deeper I went, the more I questioned myself. What if I was wrong? What if Richard hadn't done anything? What if this was just my anger, my need for revenge, twisting the truth? But then I'd think of Daniel, of the badge, of Mom's fear, and I'd push forward. I found an old phone number in one of Mom's journals, scribbled next to Daniel's name. Called it, expecting a dead line. But someone answered, an older woman, her voice wary. I told her I was Daniel's son, and she went quiet. "You shouldn't be asking about him," she said. "It's not safe." Before I could ask more, she hung up. My hands shook as I stared at the phone. Not safe. Even now, 25 years later, someone was scared. I went back to the hospital, my resolve hardening. Richard was asleep, but I didn't care. I sat by his bed, the badge in my pocket, and waited. When he woke, I'd make him talk. I'd make him tell me everything about Daniel, about Mom, about me. And if he didn't, I'd find a way to make him. But as I sat there, watching his chest rise and fall, I felt a crack in my anger, a whisper of doubt. What if the truth destroyed us all? Ellie, Mom, Muhat would be left. I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. Not until I had justice, or revenge, or whatever it was I was chasing. The line was gone now, and I was too far in. The hospital room was dim, the only light coming from the monitors casting a sickly glow over Richard's face. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, he looked vulnerable, almost human. Then he saw me, and his expression hardened. "Still here," he muttered, his voice rough from sleep. I didn't respond. I pulled the badge from my pocket, holding it up so he could see it. "Daniel Harper," I said, my voice steady. "You knew him. He was a cop. And you had something to do with his death." Richard's eyes widened, just for a second, before he masked it with a sneer. "You're chasing ghosts, boy," he said, but his hands trembled, betraying him. I leaned closer, my voice low. "I'm not a boy, and I'm not your son. You made that clear. Now tell me the truth." He didn't answer, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the badge. I could see the fear in him, the same fear I'd seen when he collapsed. But this time, it wasn't about his heart. It was about me. I felt a surge of power, dark and intoxicating, but it was laced with something else: doubt. What if I pushed too far? What if the truth broke more than just him? I left the room, the badge heavy in my hand, and found Ellie in the waiting area. She was reading a magazine, but her eyes were distant, unfocused. You okay? She asked, looking up. I nodded. But it was a lie. I wasn't okay. I was unraveling, caught between rage and guilt, justice and vengeance. I need to know what happened, I said, sitting beside her. About Dad. About Mom. About Daniel. Her face paled, and she looked away. Tom, please, just let it go. But I couldn't. I showed her the badge, told her about the letters, the journal, the money transfers. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Ellie, I said, softer now. If you know something, tell me. I need to understand. She shook her head, her voice barely audible. It's not what you think. Complicated. Complicated. That word haunted me as I drove back to the house. The badge and the letter burning in my pocket. Couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close. I went to Mom's room, determined to get answers. She was sitting on her bed, staring at an old photo album, her fingers tracing the edges of a picture I couldn't see. Mom, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Who was Daniel Harper? Was he my father? She flinched, her hands trembling. But she didn't look at me. You don't know what you're asking, she said, her voice hollow. I do, I snapped, holding up the badge. I know he was a cop. I know he loved you. And I know he died the night I was born. What I don't know is why. She closed the album, her movements slow, deliberate. Leave it alone, Tom, she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were empty, like she'd given up long ago. I wanted to shake her, to scream, but I saw something in her face, fear. Yes, but also pain, deep and raw. I backed off, my anger faltering. I spent the next few days digging deeper, calling old contacts, searching online for anything about Daniel Harper. I found a mention in an old police newsletter, a memorial for an officer killed in the line of duty. It didn't say much, just that he'd been working undercover, investigating local corruption. My mind spun. Corruption. Richard had always been connected in Willow Creek, friends in high places. Favors owed. Had Daniel been investigating him? I went back to Pete, pressing him for more. He was cagey, but he let slip that Daniel had been looking into a land deal. Something involving Richard's family. Big money, Pete said, his voice low. Daniel thought it was dirty. Then he was gone. I felt sick. It was all coming together. But it was still just pieces. Not proof. I needed something solid. Something that would make Richard confess. I went back to the hospital. My plan forming. I confront him. Lay out everything, the badge. The letters. The money. The land deal. I'd make him talk. Even if it meant threatening to walk away. To let him rot. But when I got there, he was worse. The doctors said his heart was failing again. That he needed surgery. But he was too weak. They didn't know if he'd survive it. Ellie was a wreck, clinging to Mom, who stood like a statue, her face unreadable. I sat by his bed, watching him sleep, my anger warring with something softer. Something I hated. He was dying, and I was still chasing ghosts. That night, I found Ellie in the kitchen, staring at a glass of water like it held answers. "You knew, didn't you?" I said, my voice low. "About Daniel. About me." She didn't look at me, but her shoulders shook. "I didn't know everything," she said. "But I knew enough. Dad, he told me some things. After you left. He was drunk. Angry. He said you weren't his. That Mom had betrayed him. I didn't want to believe it. My chest tightened. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Because you're my brother, Tom. Blood or not, you're my brother. And I didn't want to lose you again." Her words hit me like a punch, and for a moment, couldn't breathe. I wanted to hug her, to tell her I wasn't going anywhere. But the anger was still there, a living thing inside me. I went back to the hospital the next day, the badge in my pocket, my resolve wavering. Richard was awake, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "You're still digging," he said, his voice weak but sharp. "You won't stop, will you?" I shook my head, pulling out the badge. "Not until you tell me the truth. About Daniel. About the accident. About everything." He sighed, a sound heavy with years of secrets. "You want the truth. Fine. But you won't like it." He paused, his eyes distant. Daniel was trouble. He was poking around where he shouldn't have. He thought he could take me down. Take your mother. He was wrong. My heart pounded. "Did you kill him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Richard's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like regret. "Not the way you think," he said. "But I didn't save him either." My vision blurred, rage and grief colliding. I wanted to scream, to demand more, but he was fading, his breathing shallow. The monitors started beeping, loud and frantic, and nurses rushed in, pushing me out. I stood in the hallway, my hands shaking, the badge cutting into my palm. He hadn't confessed. Not fully. But it was enough to confirm what I'd feared. Richard had let Daniel die. Maybe he hadn't driven the car, but he'd made sure no one asked questions. I went home, my mind a storm. Ellie was there, her eyes red, her voice soft. "He's going into surgery tomorrow," she said. "They don't know if he'll make it." I nodded, numb. I wanted justice. But what did that mean now? Richard was dying, and I was still here, still his son in some twisted way, still the only one who could help him. I didn't know if I wanted to anymore, but I knew I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not until I had the whole truth. And maybe not even then. Richard's words echoed in my head. A confession that wasn't quite a confession. I didn't save him either. It was the closest he'd come to admitting guilt. And it wasn't enough. I wanted Maury a name. A detail. Something I could take to the police. Something that would make him pay for what he'd done to Daniel. To my mother. To me. But he was slipping away. His heart failing. The surgery looming like a storm cloud. I sat in the hospital waiting room. The badge still in my pocket. Its edges worn from my constant handling. Ellie was beside me. Her hands clasped tightly. Her eyes fixed on the floor. Mom was in the chapel again. her faith a shield I couldn't penetrate. I wanted to talk to Ellie, to tell her what Richard had said. But I couldn't find the words. She was already breaking under the weight of his illness. And I didn't want to add to it. Not yet. The surgery was scheduled for dawn. The doctor warned us it was risky. Richard's heart was too weak, his body too worn. I listened, nodding, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying his words, piecing together the fragments of the past. I went back to the house that night, unable to sit still in the hospital's sterile silence. I needed answers, something concrete. I tore through Richard's study, pulling books from shelves, rifling through files. I found a ledger, old and dusty, hidden behind a row of encyclopedias. It was filled with numbers, dates, names, none of them familiar. But one entry caught my eye, a payment to a man named Carl Weaver, dated the week of Daniel's death. The amount was large, too large for a simple transaction. My pulse quickened. Who was Carl Weaver? I searched online, my hands shaking as I typed. An obituary popped up. Carl Weaver. Died 10 years ago. Former tow truck driver. Richard's cousin's lot. The one where Daniel's car had been towed. My stomach twisted. Payoff. A cover-up. I didn't know. But it was another piece. Another thread to pull. I called Pete again, waking him in the middle of the night. Carl Weaver, I said, my voice urgent. Did Daniel ever mention him? Pete was groggy, irritated, but he answered. Yeah. Carl was trouble. Hung around with Richard's crew. Daniel didn't trust him. Said he was dirty. I hung up, my mind racing. Carl was dead. But he was a link, a name I could use. I went back to the hospital before dawn, the ledger tucked under my jacket. Richard was awake, his face pale, his eyes sunken. He looked at me like he knew why I was there. You don't give up, do you? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out the ledger, opened it to the page with Carl's name. What's this? I asked, holding it up. A payment to Carl Weaver, right after Daniel died. What was it for? His eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. I leaned closer, my voice low, sharp. I know about the land deal. I know Daniel was investigating you. I know he was a cop. And I know you let him die. Richard's face twitched. A flicker of something, guilt. Fear. Couldn't tell. You think you've got it all figured out, he said, his voice weak but venomous. You don't know half of it. Then tell me. I snapped. Tell me before it's too late. He looked away. His breathing labored. For a moment, I thought he'd stay silent, take his secrets to the grave. But then he spoke, his voice low, broken. Daniel was a fool. Thought he could save your mother, take her away. He didn't know her, didn't know what she'd done. My heart stopped. What she'd done? I echoed, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his eyes cold. She chose me, Tom. Not him. She came to me, pregnant with you, begging for help. I gave it to her. I married her, raised you, gave you a name. And all I got was betrayal. I staggered back, the ledger slipping from my hands. Betrayal, I said, my voice rising. You're the one who betrayed us. You lied. You controlled her. You enough. He shouted, his voice cracking, his monitors beeping wildly. Nurses rushed in, pushing me aside, checking his vitals. I stood there, my chest heaving, my mind a storm. What had Mom done? Was she part of this? I left the room, my hands shaking, and found Ellie in the hallway. She'd heard everything, her face pale, her eyes wide. Tom, she said, her voice trembling. What are you doing? I didn't answer. Couldn't. I went home, my head pounding, and found Mom in the kitchen, staring at nothing. What did you do? I asked, my voice low. Dangerous. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen before. I loved him, she said, her voice breaking. Daniel. I loved him, but I was scared. Richard, he knew things that could ruin us. I had no choice. My knees buckled. No choice, I said, my voice rising. You married him. You let him raise me, knowing he hated me. She sobbed, her hands covering her face. I was pregnant. Tom. Alone. Daniel was gone. Richard promised to take care of us. I didn't know what he'd become. I wanted to scream, to break something, but her tears stopped me. She was broken, too, just like me. I left her there, my anger choking me, and went back to the hospital. The surgery was underway, the waiting room a prison of silence. Ellie sat beside me, her hand on mine, but I barely felt it. I was drowning in questions, in rage, in a truth that kept shifting. Had Mom betrayed Daniel? Had Richard killed him? Or just let him die? And what was I doing? Chasing a ghost when the living were falling apart around me. Hours later, the doctor came out, his face grim. He's out of surgery, he said. But it's touch and go. The next few hours are critical. Ellie sobbed, clinging to me, and I held her, my anger fading, replaced by something heavier grief. I didn't know who I was grieving for: Daniel, Mom, myself, or even Richard. I went to his room, watching him through the glass, his chest rising and falling, machines keeping him alive. I hated him, but I also saw him for what he was: a man who'd made a choice. Just like Mom, just like me. I didn't know if I could forgive him, but I was starting to see that revenge wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't bring Daniel back, wouldn't heal Mom, wouldn't make Ellie whole. I went home, exhausted, and found Mom in her room, the photo album open. She looked at me, her eyes red. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. I never wanted this for you. I nodded, unable to speak. I took the album, flipping through it, seeing pictures of a life I'd never known: a young mom, smiling, Daniel beside her, their love bright and unbroken. I closed it, my throat tight. I didn't know what to do with the truth anymore. All I knew was that I was here, in this house, with these people, and they were all I had. I went to bed, the badge on my nightstand, this weight heavier than ever. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the hospital. Tomorrow, I'd face Richard, maybe for the last time. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to let Gonnet for him. But for me, the hospital was a maze of white walls and quiet whispers. A place where time seemed to slow, trapping us in its sterile grip. Richard made it through the night, but the doctors were cautious, their words heavy with warnings. His heart was fragile, they said, his recovery uncertain. I sat by his bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, the machines humming a steady rhythm. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was a hollow ache. The truth was unraveling, but it wasn't bringing the clarity I'd expected. Instead, it was a tangle of pain moms, Ellie's, mine, and maybe even Richard's. I didn't want to see his pain, didn't want to humanize him, but it was there, in the lines of his face, the tremor in his hands. I held the badge, turning it over, its edges smooth from my constant touch. Daniel Harper, my father, the man who'd loved my mother, who'd died before I could know him. I wanted to hate Richard for it, to lay every hurt at his feet. But Mom's words kept echoing. I had no choice. Had she? Had he? I didn't know anymore. Ellie found me in the waiting room, her face pale but calm. He's awake, she said, her voice soft. He's asking for you. I nodded, my throat tight, and followed her to his room. Richard was propped up, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. But his body was frail, a shadow of the man who'd towered over my childhood. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like regret in his eyes. You're still here, he said, his voice weak but steady. Why? I didn't answer right away. I sat down, the badge in my pocket, the ledger in my bag. Because I need to know, I said finally. Everything. He sighed, a sound heavy with years of secrets. You want the truth. It's ugly, Tom. Uglier than you think. I leaned forward, my voice low. Tell me. He looked away, his eyes distant, like he was seeing the past. Daniel was a problem, he said. He was digging into things, land deals, money, people I worked with. He thought he could bring me down, take your mother. I couldn't let that happen. My heart pounded. So you killed him? Richard's eyes snapped to mine, sharp and cold. I didn't kill him, but I made sure he didn't come back. My stomach twisted. What does that mean? He hesitated, his hands clenching the blanket. The night he died, he came to me, said he knew everything, said he'd go to the feds. I told him to leave, to forget your mother. He wouldn't. We fought. He left, angry, driving too fast. I knew the road he'd take. I called Carl, told him to handle it. My blood ran cold. Handle it. Richard's face was stone. Carl was drunk, reckless. He ran Daniel off the road. It wasn't supposed to kill him, just scare him. But the car flipped. Carl towed it away, made it look like an accident. No one asked questions. I felt sick, the room spinning. You let him die, I said, my voice shaking. You covered it up. Richard didn't look away. I did what I had to. For your mother. For you. I stood, my hands shaking, rage boiling over. For me. You hated me. You threw me out. Told me I wasn't your son. His eyes softened. Just for a moment. You weren't mine, Tom. But I raised you. I gave you a life. And every day, you looked like him. Every day, I saw Daniel in your face. I wanted to hit him, to scream, but I couldn't move. His words were a knife, cutting deep. I saw it now, the resentment, the pain, the twisted love that had shaped his cruelty. He hadn't killed Daniel. Not directly. But he'd let it happen. And he'd carried that guilt, turning it into anger, into control. I left the room, my head pounding, and found Ellie in the hallway. She'd heard enough. Her face pale, her eyes wide. Tom, she said, her voice breaking. Is it true? I nodded, unable to speak. She sobbed, clinging to me, and I held her, my own tears burning. We stood there, two broken pieces of a family that had never been whole. I went home, the truth heavy in my chest. Mom was in the living room, staring at the old photo of Daniel. I sat beside her, silent, waiting. I knew, she said finally, her voice barely audible. Not everything, but enough. Richard told me after it happened. Said it was an accident. Said he was protecting us. I believed him because I had to. I looked at her, seeing the weight of her choices, her guilt. Why didn't you leave him? I asked. She shook her head, tears falling. I was scared. For you. For Ellie. He was all we had. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She'd been trapped. Just like me. Just like Ellie. I took her hand, and we sat there, silent, grieving a past we couldn't change. The next day, I went back to the hospital. Richard was weaker. His breathing labored. I didn't bring the badge or the ledger. I didn't need them anymore. You're going to tell the truth, I said, my voice calm but firm. To the police. To everyone. Or I will. He looked at me, his eyes tired. You think it'll fix anything? He said. It won't bring him back. No, I said. But it's justice. For Daniel. For Mom. For me. He didn't respond. Just closed his eyes. Like he was letting go. I left the room. My heart heavy but lighter than it had been in days. I thought revenge would feel good. But it didn't. It was just a weight. One I was ready to let go. I found Ellie in the waiting room. Her face softer. Her eyes clearer. What now? She asked. I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to see this through. For all of us. The police came the next day. I gave them the ledger. The badge. The letters. Told them everything Richard had said. They listened. Their faces grim. And said they'd look into it. Richard was too weak to talk. But I knew he'd heard me. I knew he understood. I went home, exhausted, and found Mom in the kitchen, making tea. She looked at me, her eyes softer than I'd seen in years. "You did the right thing," she said. I nodded, but I wasn't sure. Justice felt hollow, like chasing a shadow. But it was something. A step toward healing. Maybe. I spent the evening with Ellie, talking about the past. About Daniel. About the family we might have been. She cried. But she smiled. Too. And for the first time, I felt like we might be okay. Richard lingered for another day, his condition unchanged. I sat by his bed, watching him, wondering if I'd ever understand him. He opened his eyes, looked at me, and said, "I'm sorry." It was the first time he'd ever said it, and it broke something in me. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. But I nodded, and he closed his eyes again. I left the room, the badge in my pocket, this weight lighter now. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I was done running. I was here, with Ellie, with Mom, with the truth. And that was enough for now. Richard died 2 days later, his heart finally giving out in the quiet hours before dawn. The hospital called, and I stood in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand, feeling nothing at first, just a strange emptiness. Ellie was asleep, Mom in her room, and I didn't wake them. I needed to sit with it, to let the weight of his death settle. The man who'd raised me, who'd hated me, who'd carried secrets that shaped my life, was gone. And with him went the chance for more answers, for a final reckoning. But maybe that was okay. Maybe I'd found enough. I went to the hospital alone, signing papers, nodding at the doctor's condolences. His body was still in the room, covered with a sheet, and I didn't look. Couldn't. Instead, I sat in the waiting room, the badge in my pocket, its edges worn smooth. Daniel Harper. My father. A man I'd never know, but whose shadow had defined me. I thought about Richard's last words, "I'm sorry," and wondered if they were enough. They weren't forgiveness. Not yet. But they were a crack in the wall he'd built between us. I went home and told Ellie. She cried, her face buried in my chest. And I held her, my own eyes dry. Mom was quieter, her grief private, locked away like so much of her life. We sat together, the three of us, in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of our past. The police investigation was ongoing, slow and methodical. They'd taken the ledger, the badge, my statement, and were digging into old records, talking to people who'd known Carl Weaver, Daniel, Richard. They warned me it might take months, that cases this old were hard to crack. I didn't care. I'd done what I could. I'd given Daniel a voice, even if it was too late. The days after Richard's death were strange, like waking from a dream. The house felt lighter, but also emptier. Ellie started talking more, sharing memories of our childhood. The good ones, the ones I'd forgotten. Mom opened up, too, slowly, telling me about Daniel, his laugh, his kindness, the way he'd made her feel safe. She cried when she spoke of him, but there was a softness in her, a spark I hadn't seen before. I listened, piecing together the man I'd come from, the man I might have been. I decided to stay in Willow Creek, at least for a while. Ellie needed me, and Mom was starting to lean on me. her walls crumbling. I took over Richard's old garage, fixing cars, rebuilding something from the ruins of our family. The townspeople watched me, some with pity, some with suspicion. But I didn't care. I wasn't here for them. I was here for us. One evening, I found Mom in the attic, sorting through old boxes. She handed me a letter, one I hadn't seen, written by Daniel to me, unborn, a month before his death. "You're my hope," he wrote, "my chance to do something right in this world." I read it over and over, my throat tight, my eyes burning. He'd never known me, but he'd loved me, and that was enough. I started to let go of the anger, the need for revenge. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by something else, love. Maybe, or the start of it. Ellie and I grew closer, rebuilding the bond we'd lost. We laughed more, talked about the future, about leaving Willow Creek someday, starting fresh. Mom joined us sometimes, her smile tentative but real. I kept the badge on my nightstand, a reminder of Daniel, of the truth I'd fought for. I didn't know if justice would come, if the police would find enough to pin Richard to Daniel's death. But I'd done my part. I faced him, forced him to see me, to say he was sorry. And in the end, I'd been there, his only hope, even if he didn't deserve it. I started visiting Daniel's grave, a small stone in the town cemetery, overgrown with weeds. I'd sit there, talking to him, telling him about my life, about Mom, about Ellie. I didn't know if he could hear me, but it felt right, like closing a circle. One day, Ellie came with me, her hand in mine. "He'd be proud of you," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, my throat tight. "I hope so." We stood there, the wind rustling the trees, and I felt something shift inside me. Redemption, maybe, or something close. I wasn't the boy Richard had cast out, nor the man Daniel might have raised. I was Tom, Ellie's brother, Mom's son, a man who'd faced the truth and chosen to stay, to rebuild, to love. I went home, the badge in my pocket, its weight a comfort now. The house was quiet, but not empty. Ellie was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, Mom humming an old song. I joined them, my heart full, my anger fading. The past wasn't gone, but it wasn't all we had. We had each other, and that was enough. I thought about Richard, about his final apology, and wondered if he'd meant it. I'd never know, but I was starting to see that it didn't matter. I spent so long chasing justice, chasing revenge, that I'd forgotten what I was fighting for. Not Richard's confession, not Daniel's ghost, but the Selly's laugh, Mom's smile, the chance to be a family again. I sat down at the table, the smell of food filling the air, and felt something I hadn't in years, peace. It wasn't perfect, wasn't complete, but it was mine. And as I looked at Ellie and Mom, I knew I'd keep fighting, not for vengeance, but for them, for us, for the future we could still have.